How's it going, YouTube? Kometchin today with another video, and today, guys, what the Brindy is going to be everything that you need to know about the meta. Today we're going to be going through several decks and how to make their board, how to break their board, and which cards and tech cards are going to be the best cards against those decks. So if you haven't already checked out my sponsors over Imperium Duelist, Dragon Shield, or Gem, definitely go ahead and do so. And without further ado, let's hop right on into our first topic. So the first thing I want to mention is going to be Labyrinth. This deck has gained a lot of popularity, being able to get to D barrier so easily, playing a ton of floodgates like Skill Drain, Goes in Match, Rivalry. These are cards that are very hard to out without the proper outage in the side deck or even in the main deck. So this is something that you really want to make sure that you're prepared for at your next event. Cards like Eradicator are really crazy, but you got to make sure that you have cards like Ash and Bell in your main deck so you can go ahead and stop your opponent from even getting to the monsters that are able to be tributed. So unless they open up like the Lord or like a Lady Labyrinth, then they're not going to be able to get to like the Lady or the Lovely via the Welcome Labyrinth or the Big Welcome Labyrinth. A lot of people forget that you can actually just Bell Big Welcome, which is pretty crazy, because that way you can at least be able to shut off the access to monsters and deny your opponent the ability to be able to tribute anything with an Erad, because we already know Erad is one of the craziest cards that you can use right now alongside D Barrier. Virtually no counterplay, so hopefully we see those cards get banned because they're just crazy unless we get like Reboot to 3, so there's like some kind of balance. But I do want to see one of those two things happen. Bell is a really crazy card this format. You can Bell so many different cards, but here are just a few. Expulsion, Big Welcome, Blessing, Mole Cricket, DD Crow, Fountain Effect, Enchantress. These are all very popular right now, so Bell is definitely a mainstay in the main deck. I would play at least 2. I'm playing 2 right now. I think the card's just too good to not play, so definitely go ahead and make sure that you do have some at least in your sideboard. Moving forward, though, I do want to talk about Kashtira. There is a really cool interaction that if your opponent uses Theosis and targets a monster they control, if you remove the monster or Book of Moon the monster, then the Kashtira Theosis will resolve without effect because it checks the attribute on resolution, so therefore you will not be able to get your summon. So let's go ahead and check out what the normal combo is in Kashtira. So if you're just starting off with Unicorn, this is a pretty simple line. You're going to be going Unicorn into Theosis, your Fenrir into Rise Heart, and so then you'll summon out the Rise Heart, go into Shangri-Ira. The Rise Heart effect now will make your opponent banish 3 cards face down, and then you'll banish Big Bang from deck. You'll go Chainlink 1 Big Bang, Chainlink 2 Shangri-Ira to go ahead and lock a zone. The Big Bang will then go ahead and grab a material. It will add it back to hand first, and then your opponent can special summon it. Usually they just will go ahead and special summon, so you can go ahead and make the Diabolos. If you have the extender, this is where you then make the Rise Heart beforehand if you want to get maximum value off of your Rise Heart. Otherwise, you'll just go ahead here and use your Diabolos effect to rip a card from your opponent's extra deck, which will then allow you to use a Shangri-Ira effect to go ahead and lock another zone. And then once a card is banished face down, the Diabolos will then go ahead and be able to banish cards from your opponent's deck equal to the number of cards they already have face down, and that will then go ahead and make the Shangri-Ira lock another zone. So let's go ahead and hop right back to the slides. So a card that I think is actually just insane against Kashtira is Lancia, and this card is almost a mainstay in the side deck right now. It's really insane. Being able to just drop this in draw phase to play around triple tactics. Also, it just cuts off Prosperity. Your opponent can't use Rise Heart, which is insane because that card's really important to the combo. They can't use cards like Scareclaw Cash or Tear Cash unless they chain it right away. So this card definitely does a lot, and you really want to make sure that you have this in your sideboard. And then of course for the entire turn you're just protected from evenly as well, so it's just an added bonus. If you play against like Adventure Sprite or any deck that's running the Adventure engine, it's usually a very big part of their engine, and if you drop Lancia early on and they open up the Enchantress and they can't use that, that's pretty crazy too. So you definitely want to make sure that you have Lancia this format. This card's so good. So moving on, we have Marincess, and this deck is really crazy. It's probably one of the better decks of the format. Being able to have a 1-card combo in about 20 utility spots is pretty insane. This card alone allows you to add Marincess Wave, which is just an imperm that makes your board unaffected. Then you can banish Coral Triangle from your graveyard and summon back links to where it equals 3. So you get a link 2 and a link 1, and then you can just go right back into Argonaut and a Bubble Reef. Just so many different plays you can make happen, and I think this card alone just really makes the grind game insane, alongside Pascalis, which allows you to add back a Marincess Dive if you really need to as well from your graveyard by just banishing itself. So there's a lot of different ways you can go ahead and gain card advantage. which when the Link 2 goes to the graveyard, you can add one back as well. Just a lot of different ways this deck is able to just play through a lot of interruption, and then also just keep creating the same board. Also, Battle Ocean just making your monster gigantic too is pretty cool. So let's go ahead and check out the combo. So here are two of the 1-card combos for the deck. The first one's going to start off with Seahorse going into the Slug, add back the Seahorse, go into Sea Angel to add the Battle Ocean. Now we're going to go into our Splash Mage, summon one back, go into our Anemone here. Anemone will then go ahead and bring back the Splash Mage into the Argonaut, and then go ahead and add back the Seahorse to our hand. Then we will have the Spell and Trap negation on the board, and this is really going to depend on what you're going up against. So this is going to be exactly what you're playing and what you think the line could be that they're going to make. So if you're playing a Spell and Trap heavy build and they don't really have much outside of like a 1-card starter, maybe they just go for this route because it's a little safer if they don't have the extender. But they could also go for this route if it's just not really many back row that they're worried about and they don't really have much of a play. You'll see Marincess go for the Anemone into the Seahorse, making Coral Triangle instead, because here you can go ahead and just pitch and add the Marincess Wave, which is an imperm that makes your monsters unaffected. So it's just a slight variation that you'll see Marincess go for. Either is going to be the Argonaut. Usually it'll always be the Argonaut because you'll have the extender. But if it's a pretty okay hand and they don't have the extender outside of like the 1-card, or if you interrupt them one time, they might just cut the combo short and just go for the Coral Triangle. But usually they can go for both, and it's the Argonaut with the Coral Triangle. I'm just showing off like the 1-card potential for a combo. So either they'll have the imperm that makes their board unaffected, or the Spell and Trap negation, or both. It really just depends on what the hand was looking like and how many interruptions that you had for them to play through. And I feel like the deck's pretty crazy, so you definitely want to know what kind of lines that your opponent can go for. And then also just know the second that an enemy goes back to the graveyard, they can go ahead and add back a Marincess card, whether it be Wave, Blue Tang, they can add back the Wave itself. There's so many different things that you're allowed to just recur in this deck. So definitely make sure that if you do have like DD Crow, you're getting rid of the Coral Triangle in the graveyard, and then if they do go ahead and target something that you control with Wave, you have something like a Droplet to go ahead and get your monster out of the way of the Wave, or if you have like a Book of Moon to just make the Marincess Wave resolve without effect. That's really important. Up next, I want to talk about Branded, and this deck's pretty crazy with the fact that they can go ahead and run cards like Expulsion to bring back the Gimmick Puppet Nightmare and then lock you out for the rest of the turn. Just passing on Mirror Jade plus the Expulsion, you really do need an answer immediately. If either of the targets for Expulsion are engraved and you open up DD Crow, if you banish one of them, neither will summon because it has to summon both, and if a card moves location, it is no longer that card and the Expulsion will resolve without effect. Also, if you have Bell and Expulsion is also really insane. You really want to make sure that you have that. Again, you really don't want to be locked out for the rest of the turn. The Dust Dragon could still be in the graveyard. Usually it is if they go ahead and fuse it off with like Cartesia. I really do like Lancia against this deck. They can't use Bishals, Branded in Red, Branded Banishment. They can't go ahead and use Mirror Jade at any point in their turn. The effect of Albion, the Fusion Summon. There's just so many different things that Lancia cuts off, and you really want to make sure that you have this card. Ash, of course, on Branded Fusion is going to be GG every time. If you have Valor or Imperm on Aluber, you almost always want to do that, because if they already have Branded Fusion, they're just going to add Lost, which is a problem. But then vice versa, if they don't have Branded Fusion, then they really need to get to that too. You will see your opponent go for the play where they go Albion, dump Retribution, and then Saronir dump the Branded Fusion, so they can go ahead and get it back to hand. At that point, using Bell on the Retribution, cut off the Branded Fusion, is going to be really important there too. You're essentially like belling Branded Fusion. You're not really, but you know what I'm saying. So that's also really cool too. Also, DD Crow in that situation is pretty crazy. You just want to make sure that you're shutting off access to Branded Fusion in this deck as much as possible. Now let's go check out the last two decks here that I have for you. So for the next deck that I have for you is going to be Adventure Sprite. Now this deck is gaining a lot of popularity, and here's a very simple 2-card combo. You're going to be using your Brave Engine to get into the Fateful Adventure. Once you have that, you'll be able to add your Griffin and pitch Angler to summon out 2 Beavers, get your Draco back, and then get your Griffin online, so therefore you can't lose to things like Nibiru. This is really cool cool too because it protects your Gigantic. You can then go ahead and summon out the blue, get to your Jet, which then will allow you to get to things like Double Cross for another interruption, and then you can make both of these into a Mannequin Cat, which will then allow you to get into cards like Testudo on your opponent's turn. Mannequin Cat is definitely what the deck revolves around now. This card's pretty insane, really being able to just allow you to get to whatever you need to. Now, of course, your hand is going to be much larger than just 2 cards, so what you search and what you summon is going to be very different based on what hand you open, especially if you open up the blue or the Jet immediately. So this is also where you could be going for like a Sprint play, leaving Sprint on board, which would then allow you to detach one from Gigantic to then go ahead and bounce the card. So it really depends on what your hand's looking like, but just off of 2 cards, this really isn't that bad. You also have the ability to go ahead and attach something with Double Cross, and again, Mannequin Cat to go ahead and summon whatever you want from the deck. You also have the choice to either play the Bujin Link 2, or you can go into Reprodocus to try and make sure that you can summon out the Totally Awesome. So there's a lot of different lines of play that you can go for in this deck, but if you're looking for a really cool way to counter the deck, you want to make sure that you're playing cards like Dark Ruler. I see Dark Ruler coming back into the format just because there's a lot of different end boards that are pretty tough to deal with at times, especially even if you're just trading it with the Sword Soul end board, it's not bad either. There's a lot of different situations too where Sprite can go ahead and summon Swat Frog and then bounce the Griffin back to their hand. So even if you do Dark Ruler, you still have at least one thing that you got to play through. So these are things that you should be thinking about, but at the same time, I do think that Dark Ruler is going to be a very adequate way to go ahead and stop the board. Another thing that you can think about again is going to be Ash or Bell and Enchantress, or even playing Gamma for the normal summon Beaver effect, or even the Gigantic effect. Of course, it's going to very much so depend on what your opponent puts up and what the rest of their hand is, but this is ideally going to be the end board, making sure that you have those cards like Dark Ruler to go ahead and negate the board, but you can also have cards like Ash, Gamma, and Bell to go ahead and just prevent the board. So for the last combo today, I have Trap Tricks. You're going to start off with Mermello and any normal trap card here. The Mermello is going to get to the Holy Utea. You're going to make Sarah set the Holy Utea, summon the Holy Utea, summon Dionea from the deck, which will then allow you to reset the card that was just pitched, and then Sarah will get you a new trap card, and then Rafflesia would be 5th summon, so you can't Nibiru. Now, if your opponent needs to search, they'll go for the search rank 4, which will then keep Nibiru online, which is even crazier. But you've got to make sure that when you're dealing with this end board, that you realize that not only is Rafflesia and Sarah both unaffected by trap cards, the Rafflesia protects the other monsters from battle, card effects, and being targeted, let alone if they have Garden too. So these are things that you really got to consider whenever you're dealing with this deck. Cards like Book of Eclipse, really solid. Cards like Book of Moon, also very solid. Again, you just want to make sure that you can get rid of the Rafflesia, because usually there's 2, so that's where Book of Eclipse is even better. These are things that you really want to consider. Cards even like Evenly Matched, very solid. If you have Lancia, definitely dropping that in the draw phase immediately, especially because of cards like Holy Utea going to the grave and your opponent being able to have a grind game. You want to make sure that you can force those cards out as soon as possible, also very solid. So this deck can definitely put up quite a few interruptions, but the end board really isn't that terrifying to deal with. Again, you just want to make sure that you are dealing with the Rafflesia first. If Garden's on the board, you probably have to deal with that first and then Rafflesia. But Lancia, again, very solid card. You can Bell the effect of Holy Utea in the graveyard too. Usually, I'm just going to use Valor or Imperm on the Mermello. You can also just Ash as well. It's really up to you, but I just want to make sure that my opponent doesn't get the Holy Utea, because that's what starts off the whole combo. So as long as your opponent doesn't have Holy Utea and you can stop them from snowballing, usually the deck just doesn't really do a whole lot. So just keep that in mind whenever you're playing against the deck next. I do hope that you enjoyed today's video. There's a lot of different decks out there in this format, and I really want to make sure that everyone stays as updated as possible as far as what the decks are doing and how to counter them. So if you haven't already checked out my Discord, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, or if you want a coaching session over my Metafy, definitely go ahead and PM me on Discord and we can talk about that. I hope that everyone has a wonderful night, and I'll catch you on the next video. Thank you.